The morning Elias Thorne walked into the First National Bank of Oakley, every man in that lobby could smell the dust on him before they saw his face. It wasn't a bad smell, necessarily. It was the smell of the Kansas plains, raw earth, diesel fuel that hadn't fully burned off, the grease of a tractor that leaked a little oil from every seal. It was the smell of work. But in 1969, inside a bank that was trying to redefine itself as a financial center rather than a granary, that smell was an intrusion. Elias stopped at the threshold. He was 34 years old, a man made of angles and sinew, his face tanned the color of a walnut shell. He wore a faded blue work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms mapped with scratches and scars from barbed wire and wrench slips. His boots were heavy, laced with mud that had dried into jagged clods. The tellers looked up. The woman in the glass booth, Mrs. Gable, offered a tight, polite smile and looked quickly back at her ledger. The silence in the room stretched thin and tight, like a fence wire about to snap. Elias felt it. He felt the weight of their judgment, the unspoken question, why is he here? He walked to the loan officer's desk. His boots made a heavy thud-thud on the tiled floor. Robert Miller was waiting. Miller was a man who had traded the sun for fluorescent lights. He was 40, with a face that had never known windburn, smooth and soft. He wore a gray suit that cost more than Elias's entire herd of feeder calves, and his tie was knotted perfectly, a precise little triangle of silk that seemed to mock the chaotic tangle of Elias's life. Miller didn't stand up. He sat behind a mahogany desk that was large enough to land a plane on, shuffling papers with a rhythmic, impatient scratch. "Sit down, Elias," Miller said, not looking up. "I've got another meeting in 20 minutes. Elias pulled out the wooden chair. He sat on the edge, his cap in his hands, turning the brim over and over. The cardboard was soft, the fabric fraying. He felt small. He felt like he was back in the principal's office, waiting for a lecture he knew he couldn't argue with. "I appreciate you seeing me, Robert," Elias said. His voice was rough, scraped low by years of shouting over wind and engines. "It's my job," Miller said. He finally looked up, his eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. "I've reviewed the file. You want to refinance the note on the North Quarter. That's the 160 acres you bought off your uncle?" "Yes. The note comes due in July. Interest rates are creeping up. I want to lock in something fixed before they get worse." Miller leaned back. He tapped a gold pen against the desk. Tap. 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 "Rates are going up, Elias. That's the truth. But you're missing the bigger problem. It's not the interest rate. It's the collateral. It's the operation itself." Miller opened a folder and spun it around. Inside were photographs. Grainy, black and white pictures taken from the road. They showed Elias's farm. They showed the house with the peeling paint. They showed the barn with the patch on the roof. And they showed the machinery. There was the 1948 Farmel H, parked near the fence. And the 1952 John Deere 40 Combine, a rusting, green behemoth that looked like a relic from a museum. "I look at these pictures, Elias," Miller said, his voice dropping into a tone of practiced concern. "And I see a dead end. The machines run," Elias said. He felt a defensive heat rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. "The H is a good tractor. I just overhauled the engine last winter. New bearings, new rings. It's 20 years old," Miller said. "It has what, 30 horsepower? Maybe 35? You're farming 440 acres with a machine that was designed for 80. You're working yourself to death for a yield that's half what your neighbor is getting." He pushed a glossy, colorful brochure across the desk. It was bright and vivid. A John Deere 4020 Synchro. It looked like a spaceship. It was painted in that deep, gleaming green that promised power and ease. "Look at that, Elias," Miller said. 90 horsepower. Power shift transmission. You don't have to clutch to shift gears. You can run the planter, the cultivator, and the baler all with hydraulic remotes. You could double your acreage. You could finish planting by noon instead of next week. Elias looked at the brochure. He looked at the price tag. $7,800. I don't need to double my acreage, Elias said quietly. I just need to pay for what I have. But you can't pay for it with that old iron. Miller's voice cracked, losing its veneer of patience. Efficiency, Elias. That's the word of the day. The 70s are going to be about efficiency. You get bigger or you get bought. It's that simple. He pulled a contract from his stack. It was already filled out. I've drawn up the papers, Miller said. We refinance the North Quarter. We roll the debt into a package for the 4020, a new 4-row planter, and a JD 4020 combine. Total loan value, $65,000. Your payment will be $485 a month. Elias stared at the number. $485. In a bad month, he cleared $600. That left $115 for groceries, electricity, taxes, and insurance. One broken axle, one drought, one bad hailstorm, and he was underwater. I can't do that kind of payment, Robert, Elias said. If the crop fails. If you have that equipment, the crop won't fail, Miller snapped. You'll be in the field 2 days before the rain comes, not 2 days after. You'll be harvesting dry grain, not wet rot. Miller leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You know, people are talking about you, Elias. They say you're stubborn. They say you're living in the past. Miller stood up. The meeting was over. I'm trying to help you, Miller said, adjusting his suit coat. But I can't help a man who wants to drown in shallow water. Here is the offer. You trade in that scrap metal for real equipment, or I can't authorize the note on the land. The bank's owners are looking for production, not nostalgia. Elias looked at the contract. He looked at the pictures of his old tractor. He thought about his father, who had bought that Farmel new in '48. He thought about the nights he'd spent in the shop, learning to feel the engine's rhythm, knowing the difference between a knock caused by a loose rod and a knock caused by bad fuel. You know how to fix that old stuff? Miller asked, a sneer creeping into his voice. Or do you just pray it starts? I know how to fix it, Elias said. Good, Miller said. Because that's all you'll have. Don't come back here in 6 months asking for an operating loan when you're stuck in the mud because you didn't have the horsepower to pull through. Elias stood up. His legs felt stiff. He picked up his cap. He didn't sign the paper. He didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked out. The afternoon sun hit him as he stepped onto the sidewalk. It was blindingly bright. The air was cold, biting at his ears. He walked to his pickup, an old Chevrolet with a dented fender and a windshield that was etched with scratches from 1,000,000 miles of gravel roads. He started the engine. It coughed, sputtered, and caught. He sat there for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. He felt a hot, burning shame in his throat. He felt like a fool. He looked at the bank building, tall and imposing. He put the truck in gear and drove away. He didn't look back. Now, before we go further, I want to know, would you have walked away like Elias did? Or would you have taken the deal, signed the papers, and bought that new tractor? Drop a comment because I think how a person handles disrespect says a lot about their character. That spring, Elias bought a welding torch and an acetylene tank on credit from a catalog. He set up a small shop in the corner of the machine shed. It was cold in there. The wind whistled through the cracks in the siding, carrying dust that coated everything in a fine gray silt. His wife, Sarah, didn't say much about the money. She was a woman who understood the long game. She had hands that were red and chapped from washing clothes in a wringer washer and kneading bread dough. She saw him sitting at the kitchen table at night, surrounded by library books, farm machinery mechanics, welding principles, hydraulic systems. You learn what you need to learn, Elias, she said one night, sliding a plate of roast beef in front of him. We aren't renting our ground to the bank. So he learned. He spent nights after the field work was done, the stars out and the temperature dropping below freezing, practicing welding beads on scrap metal. He burned through rods. He blistered his skin. He learned to control the arc, to lay down a bead that looked like a stack of dimes, strong enough to hold a plow frame together against the prairie rocks. He tore down the Farmel M he bought for $350 at a salvage auction in Hayes. It was a rusty hulk, seized up from sitting in a fence row for a decade. He dragged it into the shed on a chain. He pulled the head. He pulled the pistons. He spent a month boring the cylinders by hand with a rigid hone, his arms aching, checking the tolerances with a feeler gauge until the pistons fit with a perfect, sliding friction. He replaced the main bearings, shimming them until the crankshaft turned with a smooth, oily resistance. It was tedious, mind-numbing work. But every time he turned a wrench, he wasn't paying a mechanic. He was paying himself. The neighbors were watching. Vince Kessler, who farmed the section to the south, bought a new Case 1070 that year. It was a massive beast, over 100 horsepower, with a cab that had air conditioning and a radio. Elias was out in the field with his rebuilt M, cultivating corn. The M had no cab. No radio. The sun beat down on his neck, and the dust coated his teeth. Vince drove by on the road, the rumble of his diesel engine deep and throaty. He waved. He was drinking a soda, the cab windows rolled up, the air conditioning humming. Elias just nodded. He couldn't hear his own engine over the roar of the case. Elias looked down at his row. The cultivator's shovels were slicing through the weeds clean. The M was light on its feet, not packing the soil. It was slow, maybe 3 miles an hour. But it was thorough. The drought came. It wasn't the Dust Bowl, but it was close. The sky turned a bruised purple in the afternoons, teasing rain, but the clouds always seemed to break apart before they hit Oakley. The heat was oppressive. By August, the corn was rolling its leaves, curling tight to conserve moisture. It looked like spiky green rope. Elias had a well. It was an old windmill-driven well, but he'd rigged an electric pump to it. He spent his nights moving aluminum pipe, laying out irrigation lines. He had a traveler sprinkler, a big green gun on a wheel that sprayed water in a long, slow circle. He slept in 2-hour shifts. He'd wake up at 2 a.m., check the gun, move the hose, sleep until 4 o'clock. It was grueling. His eyes were red-rimmed. He lost 10 pounds. Vince Kessler didn't have a well. He relied on the rain. He relied on his high-yield hybrid seed that required too much water. His corn withered. It tasseled out at knee-height. A disaster. At harvest, Elias cut his corn. The ears were small, but they were full. He yielded 40 bushels an acre. It wasn't a record, but it would pay the bills. Vince yielded 12. The world changed that October. The Yom Kippur War erupted overseas, and in retaliation, OPEC declared an oil embargo. The price of crude oil skyrocketed. Diesel fuel jumped from 20 cents a gallon to nearly 50 cents almost overnight. Elias watched the price board at the co-op with a pit in his stomach. But he did the math. His Farmel M burned about 4 gallons an hour. Vince's Case 1070 burned nearly 12. Elias was spending $2 an hour on fuel. Vince was spending $6. Every trip around the field, Elias was saving money. It wasn't glory, but it was survival. Then the land prices spiked. The Russian grain deal opened up the markets. Corn prices hit $3 a bushel. Suddenly, everyone was rich on paper. Robert Miller was frantic with energy. The bank was lending money like it was going out of style. They were financing land purchases at inflated values, encouraging farmers to buy out their neighbors to get big before the prices go higher. Elias sat in the coffee shop one morning, listening to the chatter. It was a frenzy. "You gotta expand, Elias," Miller said, walking by his table with a tray of coffees. "You're sitting on gold. Refinance the house, buy the Henderson place. You can triple your operation." Elias looked at his coffee cup. "I don't know how to run 3 sections, Robert." "Hire a manager," Miller laughed. "That's what the big guys do. You're too caught up in the dirt. Get your hands on the wheel." Elias went home. He looked at Sarah. They say I'm crazy, he told her. Sarah was canning tomatoes. The kitchen was hot and humid. Maybe, she said. But we're eating our own food. We're sleeping in our own bed. And nobody can come take that away because we don't owe them for it. The first crack in the community appeared. It wasn't a loud crash, just a whisper. Old man Peterson, who had farmed the section north of town since the 1940s, had a stroke. He couldn't work the fields. His son wanted to take over, but the estate taxes were high. The son went to Miller. Miller offered him a loan to buy out his siblings, but it was a variable rate. The son was desperate. He signed. Then interest rates nudged up. The payment jumped. The son missed a payment. Miller foreclosed. Elias watched the auction. It was a cold, gray Tuesday in November. He stood in the back, his hands in his pockets. He watched Peterson's life being sold off. The tools, the harnesses, the antique tractors Peterson's father had bought new. He bought a set of wrenches for $5. They were good tools, snap-on, forged steel. He saw Miller standing by the bank representative, holding a clipboard. Miller didn't look at the Peterson boy. He just checked off items as they were sold. The machine of the bank was efficient. It didn't feel pity. The year the fear came home, Sarah found a lump. It was small, hard, and terrifying. The diagnosis was quick. Breast cancer. They caught it early, but the treatment required a surgeon in Wichita and a course of chemotherapy. Elias sat in the kitchen with the bills. Insurance covered most, but not the deductibles. Not the travel. Not the time Sarah couldn't work. The stack of papers was 2 inches thick. He looked at the farm. He could go to the bank. He could mortgage the South 40. With land values so high, he could borrow $50,000 against the dirt and never break a sweat. He picked up the phone. He dialed the bank. Robert Miller answered. First National. Robert, it's Elias. Elias, Miller said. I was just thinking about you. You still running that old M? Listen, I saw a 4430 John Deere on the secondary market. Robert, I need money, Elias said. For Sarah. The tone changed instantly. Oh. I'm sorry to hear that. Look, Elias, we can do a home equity loan. Or a land mortgage. We can have the money in your account this afternoon. Think of it. No scraping by. Just write the check. Elias looked at the bills. He looked at the picture of Sarah on the mantel, taken before she got sick. No, Elias said. What? I won't put the land up, Elias said. If the crop fails or if I get hurt, they take the farm. I can't do that to her. I'll find the money. Elias, be reasonable, Miller said. That's what land is for. Land is for growing, Elias said. Not for pawning. Elias hung up. He sold the registered Hereford bull, a prize animal he'd spent 5 years breeding. He sold the stored soybeans from the bin at the bottom of the market. He took a job driving a gravel truck for the county road department in the winter, working 16-hour days in the snow and ice. He paid the bills in cash. Every single dime. Sarah got better. She lost her hair, then it grew back gray. She was thin, fragile, but the steel was still in her eyes. One night, he came home from the trucking job, exhausted, covered in road dust and salt. He sat at the table, counting out his pay. We're still here, Elias, Sarah said, putting a hand on his shoulder. The bank doesn't own us. I know, Elias said. But I'm tired, Sarah. I'm so tired of holding on. It's not holding on, she said softly. It's standing. Interest rates hit 15%. The madness in the country began to falter. The men who had borrowed millions to buy land at $2,000 an acre were now paying 15% on those loans. The grain prices hadn't gone up. They had dropped. The math no longer worked. The auctions started to multiply. Every Saturday, the newspaper was filled with legal notices. Notices of trustee sales. Notices of foreclosure. Elias kept his head down. He had paid off his truck. He had paid off Sarah's medical bills. He was debt-free, but he was poor. He didn't have a new truck. He didn't have a vacation cabin. He had the old farmel and the land. He spent his time in the shop. He bought a junked Ford 8N tractor for $50 and stripped it for parts. He kept the salvage yards in business. He became a scavenger. He found a use for everything. Vince Kessler came by one day. He was driving his Case 1070, but he looked different. He looked tired. "Elias," Vince said. "You got any extra twine?" Elias walked over to the barn. "I have a couple of bales of sisal. It's old, but it holds." "Take it," Vince said. "Please. I'm out of credit at the co-op. They cut me off." Elias handed him the twine. He looked at Vince. "You okay?" Vince laughed, a hollow, dry sound. "I'm paying $1,500 a month just in interest, Elias. I haven't paid a dime on principal in 2 years. The bank, they're breathing down my neck." "Talk to Miller," Elias said. "I did," Vince said. "He said to sell the land. He says I can't afford to be a farmer." Elias watched him drive away. The big tractor left deep ruts in the soft ground. Compacted soil. Hard as concrete. It wouldn't drain. It wouldn't grow. The bottom fell out. It was a cold, wet spring. Planting was late. Then the prices crashed. Corn went to $1.80. Wheat to $2.50. The county was a graveyard of dreams. The implement dealer in town, the man who sold the shiny new tractors, locked his doors. He wasn't selling. The farmers weren't buying. He was gone by July. The mercantile, the old general store, closed. They couldn't compete with the big Walmart that opened in the next town over, and the farmers didn't have the spare cash to buy candy bars for their kids. Elias drove down Main Street. It was empty. The wind blew tumbleweeds across the pavement. It looked like a ghost town. Robert Miller was still at the bank, but the laughter was gone. The bank itself was in trouble. The FDIC was auditing them weekly. They were drowning in bad debt. Vince Kessler lost the farm in September. Elias saw this sale bill, tacked to the post office wall. It was 10 pages long. Elias went to the auction. He stood in the back, his hat pulled low. Vince was there, watching his life be sold. The Case 1070 went for $8,000, less than he owed on it. The planter sold for scrap. Elias bought Vince's hay baler. It was a New Holland 273, a square baler. Vince had taken good care of it. Vince saw Elias buy it. He walked over, his eyes red. "You'll take care of her?" Vince asked. "I will," Elias said. "Vince, I'm sorry." Vince looked at the ground. "I just want it to be big, Elias. I just want it to be like the pictures in the magazines. The year of the vultures." The corporations moved in. Insurance companies, investment firms. They bought the foreclosed land for pennies on the dollar. They hired managers to run it. They farmed from offices in Chicago. Elias was an island in a sea of corporate asphalt. He was surrounded by fields owned by people who had never walked them. He spent the winter rebuilding the transmission on his John Deere 40 combine. The gears were stripped. He found a used gear set in a salvage yard in Nebraska, drove 6 hours one way in a snowstorm to get it. He worked in the unheated shop, a propane heater glowing orange nearby. His hands were stiff with cold. He split his knuckles on the housing. He bandaged it up and kept working. He was 52 years old now. His hair was white. His face was a map of the seasons. Sarah brought him lunch. "Robert Miller was in the store today," she said. Elias wiped grease off his hands. "Yeah? He looks bad," Sarah said. "Thin. Rumpled suit. I hear the bank might close." Elias paused. He looked at the gear he was holding. The metal was cold, heavy. "He sold a lot of dreams, Sarah. Dreams have a price." "He blamed you," Sarah said. "Once. Said you were the reason he couldn't get the quality accounts. Said you dragged the average down? Elias grunted. I was just farming. I know, Sarah said. And you're still here. And he's not. Elias didn't say anything. He didn't feel victory. He just felt the weight of the years. If you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button because I've got dozens more tales like this. Farmers who survived by doing things their own way, and the price communities paid when they forgot old wisdom. The crisis reached its peak, then slowly, painfully, began to stabilize. Interest rates dropped. Grain prices leveled off. The weak were gone. Only the strong, or the stubborn, remained. It was October. The harvest of '85 was a gamble. A wet spring had delayed planting, and now the frost was threatening to come early. Elias was harvesting his soybeans with the John Deere 40 combine he'd spent years nursing along. It was a noisy machine, a rattling, clanking beast, but it cut clean. To the south, the corporation that owned Vince's old land was harvesting with a fleet of brand-new John Deere 8820 Titans. They were machines of awesome power, massive combines with 30-foot headers. Then, the weather turned. The forecast called for a hard freeze. Not a frost, but a freeze that would turn the beans to brittle stone and shatter them on the ground. The corporate manager, a young guy named Jerry, was running 3 combines day and night, trying to beat the front. Elias saw the lights burning in their fields at 2 a.m. Around 3 a.m., the lights on the southern field stopped. One by one, they went dark. Elias watched from the cab of his 40. He saw a pickup truck come tearing down the dirt road, fishtailing in the gravel. It stopped at Elias's lane. Jerry ran up to the combine, waving his arms. Elias stopped the machine. Mr. Thorne! Mr. Thorne! Elias climbed down. What is it, son? The main combine. The Titan. The axle snapped. The wheel fell off. It sheared the drive shaft and cracked the transmission housing. It's dead. It's sitting on its belly in the mud. Elias looked at the sky. He could smell the cold front coming. It smelled like ice and iron. You got others? 2. But they're on the north section. It'll take them 3 hours to get here. We're going to lose the crop. We're going to lose it all. Jerry was panicking. He was terrified of the corporate office. Can we rent yours? Please. We'll pay double. Triple. Whatever you want. Elias looked at his combine. It was small. A 12-foot header. It would take forever. It would be slow. You'd be here all week, Elias said. Just get the beans out of the ground, Mr. Thorne. Save what you can. Elias looked at the kid. He saw the terror he'd felt in the mirror 15 years ago in the bank. Start the truck, Elias said. I'll follow. They worked through the night and the next day. It was a blur of noise and vibration. Elias ran the combine. He couldn't stop. If he stopped, the engine would cool down and hard to start. He ran it hard. He pushed the old engine to the red line. The bearings screamed. The temperature gauge climbed. Around noon, the separator started plugging. The crop was heavy, wet with the dew of the coming freeze. Elias shut it down. He climbed out, covered in dust and chaff. He grabbed a pipe wrench and climbed up onto the platform. He beat the cylinder housing with the wrench, knocking the packed chaff loose. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. And it wasn't from the cold. He climbed back in. Started it up. Kept going. They finished the field just as the sun set. The temperature was dropping fast. By the time they parked the machines, the frost was forming on the windshields. Jerry climbed out of the truck. He looked exhausted. He looked at the full-grain trucks lined up on the road. You saved us, Mr. Thorne, Jerry said. I don't know how to thank you. Elias leaned against the tire of the combine. He was filthy. He was bone-tired. Just doing the job, Jerry, Elias said. No, Jerry said. I saw your machine. It held together. It shouldn't have. It has heart. The following week, Elias went into town. He needed filters for the combine. He walked into the hardware store. It was the only store left besides the co-op. He was looking at the shelf of oil filters when a man in a stocking cap walked down the aisle. He was restocking cans of paint. Elias looked at him. It was Robert Miller. Miller looked older. Much older. His hair was thin. His back was stooped. The suit was gone, replaced by a clerk's apron. He looked like a man who had been dragged behind a horse. Miller saw Elias. He froze. "Robert," Elias said. Miller looked down. He gripped the paint cans tightly. "Elias. Heard you closed the bank," Elias said. "Consolidated," Miller said, his voice a whisper. "Merged with the big bank in Hayes. They kept the young guys. The aggressive guys." Elias nodded. He picked up a filter. "Sorry to hear that, Robert." "I deserved it," Miller said. He looked up, his eyes watery. "I pushed too hard. I didn't understand. I thought you were just stubborn. I thought you were holding us back." "I was just holding on," Elias said. "I lost everything," Miller said. "The house. The cabin in the mountains. My wife, she left. She couldn't handle the shame." Elias looked at the man who had held his future in his hand 15 years ago. The man who had called him a fool. The man who had tried to sell him a life he couldn't afford. He didn't feel the anger anymore. It had burned off a long time ago, like the summer heat. He just felt a quiet sadness. "You were doing your job, Robert," Elias said. "You were following the rules of the time." "I was arrogant," Miller said. "I was cruel. I called you obsolete." Elias reached into his pocket. He pulled out a roll of bills, the cash he'd been paid for helping with the harvest. It wasn't a fortune. It was a few $100s. He put it on the shelf, next to the paint cans. "Buy yourself a coat," Elias said. "Winter's coming." Miller stared at the money. "Elias." "I can't." "Take it," Elias said. "We're all just trying to get by." Miller picked up the money. His hand was trembling. He looked at Elias, and his face crumpled. He didn't say thank you. He just turned around and walked to the back room. "What would you have done in this moment? Would you have helped? Could you have forgiven? Leave a comment, because this is where character really shows." The Sunday before Thanksgiving, the snow came early. It was a heavy, wet snow that blanketed the fields and muffled the sound of the wind. Elias drove out to the home quarter. He parked the truck on the hill overlooking the farm. Below him, the land was white and still. The house was warm, yellow light glowing from the kitchen windows. The barn stood solid against the drifts. In the yard, the machinery was parked. The Farmel H. The John Deere 40. The New Holland baler. They were buried in snow up to their axles. They were old. They were obsolete. But they were his. Sarah came out of the house, carrying a mug of coffee. She walked up to the truck, her breath puffing in the cold air. "Cold out," she said. "Yep," Elias said. "Thinking about the old days?" "No," Elias said. He looked at the snow-covered machines. "Thinking about today. You win, you know," she said. Elias smiled. A small, crooked smile. "Win what?" "Nobody owns this but us," she said. "You did it. You kept the promise." Elias took a sip of the coffee. It was hot and bitter. "I had a lot of help," he said. "You did it yourself, Elias Thorne," she said. "One wrench turn at a time." Elias looked at the horizon. The clouds were breaking up, revealing the stars. Bright, burning, distant stars. "I suppose," he said. He watched the snow falling on the rusty steel of the old tractor. "She's still got good iron in her, Sarah. She'll run another season." "I know she will," Sarah said. "Because you do." Elias put the truck in gear. They drove down the hill, toward the lights of the house. The world was quiet. The debt was gone. The land was theirs. And that was enough.